Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, it is our exit interview with Mike Miller, who, after 7 years as the IU sports beat writer for the Herald-Times, is leaving. Talk to Mike about why he's leaving, what's next for him, and reflect on his time covering IU basketball. Obviously look back at the Tom Crean era, the first couple years of the Archie Miller era. Talk about some players that he really found fun to interact with and cover. A lot of great stories, a lot of great memories from Mike. And we also talk about the newspaper business and some of the challenges that the Herald-Times is facing, that the paper business itself is facing. Not a particularly uplifting conversation, but I think a really, really important one that is worth sticking around for. And then we end with a more lighthearted topic. After that, you'll definitely want to stick around for. All of that coming on this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. And here now is our conversation with Mike Miller. All right, well, this is a bittersweet episode of Podcast on the Brink as we bring you our exit interview with Mike Miller, former IU sports beat writer for the Herald-Times for 7 years. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to reconnect with some friendly, familiar faces out in my past life.
Yes. So you are, just before we get started and kind of reflect on your time at Indiana, let's update everybody on kind of what you're doing now and why you left. Because you're in St. Louis right now. So why did you leave Bloomington? What's next for you?
I left because my girlfriend got a job. She was previously teaching at Kelly, and she got a job offer at Washington University School of Business. And it was just a situation she couldn't turn down. It was a great opportunity for her to work with a really talented team. I think that was a little bit more aligned with some things she wanted to do. So it was a no-brainer for us to come out here. Definitely difficult to leave Bloomington in the Herald-Times, but I think it also kind of aligned with the trajectory of the two the programs, the football and basketball programs. It was sort of like, I think I'm done here. I think I've said what I wanted to say and seen what I want to see. So I moved out here and I'm still looking for exactly what I'm going to be doing next. But it's been out here a month and so far so good. It's been a lot of fun.
You did an interview with Chronic Hoosier as well, which we'll of course direct everybody to because that was very entertaining. What are you going to miss the most about Bloomington, you think?
I already miss so much about it. People are number one. Just so many people out there, friends I made, in the 7 years I was there. I came to Bloomington on a recommendation from Chris Corman, the former IU beat writer, columnist at the HT. Chris is my journalism mentor. We met while I was interning at the Baltimore Sun, right after he had left Bloomington, and he directed me out there. And I thought I'd be out there for maybe 2 years. And a few months in, I met Dustin Dopierk. He became one of my best friends. Dustin introduced me to so many other people, and just everyone was so welcoming, so kind, and so good to me out there that it was really hard to leave all the people. The restaurants I frequented, Taste of India. I already missed Taste of India on 4th Street. Just so much about the place, and it's just such a special place. And I've already told my girlfriend we're going back. We're probably going to go back to a football tailgate at some point this year. Just to reconnect with everybody. But it is such a special place. And I'm not an IU grad. I had no connection to the university before I took the HD job, but just the town itself and the people you meet through that school. There's so many good people, so many great memories. It's a place that I think that'll always be close to me the rest of my life.
So you were in Bloomington for 7 years. And I'm curious, what were your expectations when you took the role? And then how did your experience kind of match those expectations?
I came out there to take a high school sports job with the expectation that Dustin was eventually going to move on, because that was something Chris had told me. Dustin, had been there. He'd kind of done his tour of duty and was looking for the next step in his career. And it eventually happened. He moved on to Knoxville, and they bumped me up to the IU beat. And that was the goal all along. And it was something that I wanted to do. It was important to me just because, Dustin and Chris are two of my best friends in this business, just two of my better friends, overall. And to step into a role that they had both occupied and performed really admirably. It was it meant a lot to me. It was important to me, and I really, really wanted to do that. That was my mission in going to Bloomington. I was able to do it. It was a wild time on that beat because I jumped in right as I think the 2014 season was beginning. It was another weird football season for IU football, and then obviously you have the whole Devin Davis, Emmett Holt stuff, kicking off the basketball season. It was just it was. I think it was an apt welcome to that beat. Just all the crazy things that go on, but just getting on that beat overall. It was why I went to Bloomington. It was what I wanted to do more than anything else. Again, I had no connection to Indiana, IU, Bloomington, whatever. But it was always a program that just fascinated me. After having read Season on the Brink and getting to know Chris, it was just always a place that was just very interesting to me. And these basketball-minded schools, and I always grew up a college basketball fan. I was a Maryland fan growing up in Baltimore, so I kind of was used to that kind of approach at a school where it was just basketball all the time. But Indiana was obviously always one of those places that just fascinated me and was really interesting with the history and the potential for the future. And it was everything I wanted it to be. It was just an incredible experience.
Mike, I first really got to know you on that trip in Montreal, which is, I think, right after kind of you got the job. You had the opportunity to go up to Montreal and follow IU up there. I'm curious kind of, from the time you took the job to, when you left, there was a ton of different things that went on with the program. What sticks out as maybe the two or three from an IU basketball perspective moments that you covered, wrote about, or in terms of just interest from maybe not just readers, but in terms of just things that you enjoyed covering, or from a news perspective, what you maybe thought were the most interesting stories over the time you were on the beat?
I think just starting with that whole the car accident in 2014, I was just both from a personal view of seeing Devin Davis and his potential in limbo, and just it was a very scary and very touch and go situation for a while, and it was it all felt like, and you coupled that with the suspensions with Troy Williams, Stan Robinson, it felt like it was all starting to crumble before you. The Crean era was starting to crumble, and obviously cracks had been in the foundation of the Crean era for a while before that. But it all felt like it was about to crumble, and just reporting on all that, it was a fascinating experience, a fascinating introduction to IU basketball and Tom Crean and everything that goes on behind the scenes. I also think just that 15-16 season. I think about that constantly, which is what a wild run that was. I can imagine that must have been fun for fans, but it was fun for me, man. I had no rooting interest, but just kind of seeing the turnaround and the change in the narrative, and just seeing a team that just kind of figured it out and figured out who they are and who they wanted to be on the fly was just was really interesting to watch, really fun to cover. That was a fun group, honestly, just kind of watching the change happen in coaching eras. Going from Tom Crean to Archie Miller, I think was, in a lot of ways, it was a 180-degree turn. So much change. Philosophically, structurally, personality-wise. Just so many changes happened. It was interesting to kind of be on the forefront and watch that happen right before your eyes. There was not a dull moment on this beat. It was even that first year with Archie when results aren't there, and even last year too, for that matter. But just watching how that process took hold, watching how he installed different ideas and systems, and just watching it all change. Watching everything that happened over those years, it was just really interesting to kind of see it, from that front row seat.
You mentioned the change in philosophy from the former coaching staff under Tom Crean to what IU is now under Archie. Do you feel like Indiana's getting closer to taking on a different identity? Because it seems like anytime there's a coaching change, there's an adjustment period. Do you feel like Indiana basketball is, in terms of identity, what Archie Miller wants it to be, or do you still feel like there are things that are going to have to change over the next couple of years for him to kind of be able to mold this into his own program?
I think honestly right now it's a little bit of both. I think you're definitely seeing some changes and some positive ones at that. I think that it's easy to get lost in the overall results and miss some of the change as it's happening. I mean, defensively, I mean, I think it's been remarkable what he's able to do with that group and get some of the results and the tangible and gradual growth in both those seasons on the defensive end. I mean, I think they've done a better job addressing some of the turnover issues that plagued the Crean years. I mean, you're seeing some things, and I think you're getting back to a way of basketball that I think people in Indiana IU fans really want to see and really appreciate. But with that, I mean, there's still a lot that needs to happen, a lot that needs to change. I mean, you got to figure it out. And I'll be interested to see. I don't think it's wise to completely write off Archie yet on that side of the floor. I just think that once you get some, an injection of a better skill, maybe some guys who maybe fit his personality or ideas better, maybe you'll see some change, some more positive growth on that end. But I think you're seeing growth, and obviously there's still more to come. But I think that Archie's in tune with what. I think he's true to himself, but I think he's also in tune with what it means to play basketball at Indiana University. I think he's in tune with what people want to see and how to be done. It's just a matter of actually getting those results to manifest themselves and surface in a lot of ways on that offensive end.
What is the impression of Indiana fans that you take with you to St. Louis? Obviously, you've been covering the team during a time, as we mentioned, where there's been some interesting stories, but not as much success as everybody certainly hoped or expected when you took over. And a lot's been talked about, with the fan base, and it feels toxic and yada yada, all this stuff. What's your impression of the Indiana fan base, especially coming from kind of an outsider, someone who didn't grow up in Indiana?
Yeah, it was the fan base was exactly what I thought it would be. Is 12 months out of the year hungry for basketball, and I love that. I think it's so cool. I think it's so great. I mean, there are high expectations, and I think those expectations are not being met. They haven't been met for a long time, at least consistently. You're kind of at this weird point of the Archie Miller era where you thought you'd have a little bit more tangible success and growth to point to at this point, 2 years in. It's just I'll probably get back to this later, but just the return on investment so far is just not there. It hasn't been there with IU basketball as a whole for a while. And fans have every single right to expect that. I mean, that's your bell cow for the athletic department. That's your identity almost as a Hoosier, whether it's as an IU alum or as a native state. I mean, success in basketball is what needs to happen. It's what should happen. It's what everyone expects to happen. And, everyone talks about the sometimes unrealistic expectations. Well, I don't know that they're always that unrealistic. I think that this is a school that can produce a winning basketball team, a team that consistently gets to the tournament, a team that consistently has potential and a ceiling to get, to that second weekend. I mean, it's all there in place. It's just a matter of someone's got to have that touch to get it done. And whether Archie is that guy, I certainly have a few more doubts now than I thought I would at this point 2 years ago. But it's, I always thought it was interesting when especially some national pundits would sort of chastise the Indiana fan base for their unreal expectations. Well, I don't think they're always that unreal. I think that this is absolutely the kind of school, the kind of program that can get those things done, can accomplish those big picture goals and do it regularly, can be that consistent presence that used to be. I mean, the money's there, the infrastructure's there, so much of what you need to do that and have that long-term trajectory on that scale of the national, landscape. It's all there. It's all there in place. Just, they got to figure it out. They got to get some better players at some point. They got to get some guys to develop maybe a little bit more than they have. It's all there, though. I mean, the fans have. I just always thought it was kind of ridiculous for some people to say that the expectations of Indiana fans were too high. I mean, it's Indiana basketball. It's Indiana. It's our friend Tom. It's all there. I think that fans have every right to expect all that they do. It can be done.
It seems clear what your expectations are big picture for Indiana basketball. I think we would agree, and most of the fan base would agree. What do you think are fair expectations for next year's team, given what you know of the personnel and the coach and the current status of the program?
I wrestled with that all spring while I was still in my former position. I don't have very high expectations for next year. And, I'm not sure that the ceiling is too high. I mean, I think that things could go right and they could be a tournament team. I do think that. But I also still I'm just not sure I see it personnel wise, and both in terms of skill and personality. I mean, you can start with, you look at the on the court product that they're going to put out there. I'm still not sure the skill. I mean, they got to have guys take jumps. I mean, they need a big jump from a guy like Justin Smith. They need Devontae to be the NIT version of Devontae. I mean, and with that too, I question whether, just the leadership is in place internally to accomplish some of those goals. I mean, I think that, your senior class has a lot to prove in that regard. I'm just not sure, that, a team led by senior Devontae Green is the kind of leadership you need in one. I mean, he has not proven it to this point at all. Not one bit. I'm not sure. I really see that being a positive for Indiana going forward. You look at the 3-point line. Obviously, so much has been said and written about that. And moving it back, I'll be interested to see just what kind of effect that'll have. I think at the end of the day, you just got to make shots. And, these kids practice from that distance all the time, and it's marked on the floor in Cook Hall. I mean, it's not going to be anything totally new, but at some point you just got to make shots. And it still remains to be seen that this group is equipped to do that outside of a Devontae or, maybe Al Durham. I think Rob Finney certainly has that potential. I think he'll take some steps next year, but that is the bright side right there. Just having a point guard you can trust, a point guard you can build around, a point guard I think Archie really, really likes. In Rob Finney. So it's an interesting team. It's a team I think that could make the tournament, but there's still so much to be proven, so much we haven't seen yet from these guys, from this system, from this coach, that it's hard to say with any confidence that, they're going to end the drought next year. I think guys are certainly motivated. I think that, just talking to Devontae and Deron Davis after last season, I mean, they are very aware that they would be going down in IU history for all the wrong reasons if they did not make the tournament last year. I mean, that's known in that locker room. But it's still a matter of whether these guys can really connect and accomplish the things that they had so far been unable to accomplish. And I do think that I'm curious to see just what effect not having Romeo in that lineup will have. I just felt like last year he deferred too much, or other guys deferred to him too much. There's just so many moments where it seemed like guys were unsure of where the ball should go or who should be. It just there was a lot of I think that team just lacked a lot of confidence in a lot of different ways. So I'm interested to see just what effect, if that'll lead to any sort of more free flowing offense in any sort of way next year, because it's possible. But again, I mean, you're losing it, a lottery pick and one of your toughest players in recent memory in Juwan Morgan. It's just it's personally I'm not sure I see a tournament team, but I do think that potential's there. It's just, as I think a lot of people would agree, it's just so much we haven't seen, so many left unanswered that it's really hard to project at this moment.
Mike, I want to ask you about the Big Ten in general, and not about specific teams and programs. I'm curious, just as somebody who had a chance to go see every Big Ten road venue, what were maybe your 2 or 3 favorite places to go and why? And was there any venue that stuck out as in, I wish I would never have to go to this place again? I think I can guess what it would be, but I think I know the answer. But I'm curious, like the best and worst venues in the Big Ten for basketball in your mind.
Yeah, we'll start with the latter half of that, because I think you can guess. You want to guess which one I would never want to go back to?
Rutgers.
Absolutely, 100%, no doubt about it. That place is just it's. Look, I don't want to be too hard on Rutgers here, but that place is a dump, man. It is just not. That is not. It's just not a good place. It's not a good venue. I mean, I
have a perfect record in that I've never been there, and I hope to never go. So.
Don't go. It's first of all, like there's no good way to get there, because you got to fly to either Newark or Philadelphia. No one wants to go to either of those airports. And then you get on the turnpike, you go to Rutgers, and it's just this big old barn, and it is just. It is not. There's no charming or redeeming qualities. I mean, I love the big old barn arenas, but not this one. There's just nothing about it that really is memorable or good or comfortable. And plus, you're. I won't say that. You're at Rutgers. It's not great. But the good thing about the Big Ten is they have a lot of other cool places to go, both in terms of cities and venues. Williams Arena in Minneapolis is, at the top of my list. I mean, that's an old barn with some charm. That's got some personality and some character to it. And I've always been a fan of the race floor. I know that people have very good and rational reasons to be against the race court, but I've always been a fan of it. I think it's fun. I think as far as, obviously we were spoiled, to have Assembly Hall. I mean, I just talking with visiting writers, I mean, they're always just taken aback when they step in there and just kind of, sense the history of the place. I mean, that was cool to have that, in our backyard, so to speak. But going to Mackey was always a treat. Going to Breslin Center was always a treat. I think of the newer arenas, honestly, Xfinity Center in Maryland was done as well as you could do. I think a newer building, just kind of been able to capture the student energy and the noise. And, it's I think as far as new buildings go, they did a really good job with that. So more often than not, it was always in a good environment for college basketball. The Ohio States and Rutgers notwithstanding. I mean, those places don't really have much charm or personality or a whole lot going for them. But there was a bunch of places. I mean, I always thought Chrysler was a little overrated. I don't know. There's just not. I don't know. It's not. It doesn't get too terribly loud there. It's not an overwhelming environment. There were definitely some cool trips. I mean, sitting behind the bench at Illinois was always a treat. I don't think Archie liked the fact that we were behind the bench there, because I think a bunch of us were after Brendan Quinn did his series on following the Michigan State, Michigan teams and writing what he saw from behind the bench. I think we all went into that game at Illinois this year looking to do something similar, or at least pay more attention to exactly what was happening on the bench. I think Archie picked up on that at one point and was a little, what are you guys doing? Like, you just watch the game. He didn't say that, but you can kind of get, he had noticed that we were paying this special attention to it.
At least it was a good game.
That was actually a game where, if guys are watching it, you're not too worried about it. But that was always a treat there going to Illinois and being able to hear everything on the bench.
So I have a couple more questions about your time at Indiana. And this first question, as I'm about to ask it, I'm realizing it may have been a little bit unfair to not prep you for this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and you take it whatever direction you want. I'm curious, as you reflect on stories you wrote, opinions that you had, what is one that you look back on and say, you know what, I really nailed that. Like, I was really right. And what's maybe another one conversely where you say, you know what, I believed it when I said it, but I was proven wrong by what actually happened. Are there any that jump out off the top of your head?
Oh, it's a tough one.
No, that's why I said I should have prepared you for it ahead of time. Sorry.
No, it's I can probably think of something. One thing that does a lot of emails going back to the start of the 14-15 season. I got a lot of emails. People were upset, I think, with the tone of my coverage toward Tom Crean at that point. Just because, so many things are adding up. So many things were adding up against Tom and the long-term viability of his tenure there. It was just, it seemed like the end was near at that point, just going into that season with everything that was happening. And I think I wrote some things and pointed to some evidence. And certainly at the end of that season, I wrote a story about just how his teams perform, down the stretch and why it always seemed like, they were maybe a little sluggish, maybe just had dead legs or something like that. It was, I think that just from being present for, the 12-13 year, 13-14 year and seeing that's when you saw the cracks emerge in the Crean era. Being able to see that and seeing where that program was at that point. I mean, it's just, you could sense that the end was near. And really, this on Chronic's podcast was just, there were so many little things that added up in the Crean era where, if you're Fred Glass and you wanted to make a move, you would have been justified at any point after 13-14. there was just so many things that I think so much evidence that pointed and said, this probably isn't going to work out as long as Tom hopes, as long as IU hopes. Because IU, I think, really did want that to work for a number of reasons, money included. But there was just so many things I thought that you could point to and say, well, this probably isn't what we want, or this probably isn't what we need, or this isn't helping, or this is just more ammunition for the people who want him gone. Some of them were big things, but a lot of them were just little things. Just structurally going to practice, having a schedule, being on time for press conference was a personal grievance of mine. But just the recruiting, and seeing some of the results on the floor just weren't changing. I mean, just the Crean teams were who they were. I mean, they were free flowing, just toss the ball out, guys go play some basketball. But they obviously had their warts, and no pass was a bad pass, and no defense required. I mean, just some of those things weren't changing, and there was just so many things adding up. And I think they were visible to a lot of fans, going into that 14-15 season. They were certainly visible to myself, and I think you were able to write, and I certainly did. I think to a point, and point out some of those things, and say we're scheduling, just pointing to these things and saying, well, here's something. I didn't really pass judgment on it in print, but I left it up to the reader, and I think some readers and some Crean supporters picked up on that. But I thought I got that right, and I thought that, again, as a lot of fans nowadays will certainly say they felt the same way, and rightfully so. I just thought that you saw the cracks emerge, early, and I think that at any point, like I said, after that 13-14 season went the way it did, I think there was justification or evidence that you could have made a move, the buyout notwithstanding. So that's the first thing that comes to mind without having been prepped, Jerod. Thank you very much.
Any on the flip side that come to mind that you kind of think, maybe I didn't get that one right, or?
No, I think I was perfect, actually. Nah, that's tough.
We can come back to it if you don't have anything.
Yeah, maybe we'll come back to it.
Okay. Well, one other question I did have, just in terms of the individuals, and you talked a little bit about Tom there, and we've, the topic of the differences between Tom Crean and Archie Miller has been, beaten to death, so we don't need to talk about that. But I am curious, it's such a big part of your job is just interacting with people and with players and with young people that are in this really interesting time in their lives. Who were some of the most unique, interesting players that you just really enjoyed covering, really enjoyed talking to as a part of your job?
Honestly, he's been on my mind just because with the finals. But OG, we didn't get a lot out of OG, but I always enjoyed my interaction with OG, especially when we had him in the tournament settings where you had the open locker room and you could just talk to him as a person. Just an interesting guy, funny kid. It was just, you could tell, beneath the facade where he wasn't going to give us much. It wasn't done with disgust or distaste. He just wasn't into that kind of thing. But you could sense underneath that facade, he was a good kid, and I got that sense while the recruiting process was going on, and furthermore, while I was writing a story about his childhood and how he found basketball, talking to his father and his brother, and I really enjoyed OG. I think Max Bielfeldt was just a breath of fresh air coming in. Because it felt like I think anyone on the beat would probably say this, we don't get to know the players, and it hurts us from a reporting perspective. It hurts us from a storytelling perspective, but I think it also hurts the players, and that they don't trust us, and that they don't realize that, we're there doing a job. Yes. And sometimes we have to ask, probing questions that they might not want to answer, but we're not out to get anybody. And I think that there seemed to be, during the Crean years, some distrust. It didn't seem like players were really, all that interested in getting to know us. And, I understand that. I mean, why would they be? They have a million other things going on. They have the weight of IU basketball on their shoulders. But, there were very limited windows where you get to know these kids. Really, unless you plant that seed and get to know them in the recruiting process and go to their high school games and really have that unfettered access. I mean, it can sometimes be tough to crack a wall. Bielfeldt came in from Michigan, and he was there for 1 year. He knew it, and it was probably going to be the last year he'd ever played basketball. And he was just there. He was there for the ride. He was there to experience Indiana basketball. And, I think he understood our jobs. And not only was he a breath of fresh air in the press room, I think he was a breath of fresh air in the locker room. And I think he really tied that team together and really became the glue that brought them together and allowed them to really become the team that they were down the stretch. Just a really good guy to talk to, really insightful guy, knew the game well, could articulate the game well. I always enjoyed him. And gosh, I know I'm going to forget Juwan Morgan. I mean, one of my just favorite people to cover. I've covered a lot of teams in a lot of different sports, and Juwan Morgan is at the top of the list as far as just people. He's everything I think people think he is. I think that really good kid, great upbringing. Everyone knows that he's got a really good family behind him, but just a really good kid. And it was a pleasure to cover him. It was a pleasure to see him become the player that he became the last 2 years, because he worked hard and he was just he's humble and kind and very just a great guy to get to know. I say that there were, it was difficult to really penetrate that wall, and it was, but there were definitely some guys like that where they didn't hesitate to open up or give you, their honest take. I mean, I feel like some of the honest takes were few and far between at times, but there were definitely guys like that. I really enjoyed Duran. I think Duran is another one of those guys that doesn't hesitate to be honest in assessments, both in terms of his personal game or the team at large. And I'm trying to think back if there's anyone else in those early years, on at least my time on the beat, that really sticks out. And I'm sure there are. I mean, Colin Hartman was great. He was another guy toward the end, was really comfortable in his own skin and didn't really let the world of IU basketball consume him. He was, he understood just kind of, his role in the team and what was expected of him, and how he could kind of use his voice a little bit to help both himself and the team. A lot of guys like that. I mean, there definitely were. But at the same time, as a reporter, and I'm not sure a ton of fans really think this way or even care, and I totally understand. But as a reporter, it would have been nice to have better access, or at least, more personal relationships with guys, because it informs the way you write, it informs the way you report, and it I think it benefits everybody. There's the IU basketball sort of exists in its own world, its own bubble. I mean, it's, you just look at its place on the athletics campus. It's just kind of sequestered there in Cook Hall. And I thought at times in the Crean era, there was this bunker mentality that kind of, infiltrated the locker room as well. But I think that everyone would probably benefit from a little bit better access, and just this, we're not out to get guys. And I think that everyone on that beat, is there for the purpose of telling stories and doing the reporting that's necessary, but also, all of that would benefit from better access and the ability to create, more personal relationships with guys, both on the roster and in the facility.
Agreed.
Switching gears, Mike, and I did prep you for this before, so unlike Jerod, I was
Alex is a professional. I'm just a podcaster.
I prepped you for this, but as the son of somebody who worked in the newspaper industry for 30 plus years, and I know that I don't even remember when this was, but I think just at one point I asked you, and you may not even remember this, like, do you ever plan on leaving the Herald-Times? And you're like, no, man, I love this job. Like, I want to be here or whatever. And, I wasn't shocked that you left, obviously, based on kind of what has gone on in the newspaper industry in general. And I know there was other circumstances that kind of led to your departure, but I know in the back of your mind, you've thought about just the state of the industry. And there's all this talk now that Gatehouse, who just bought the Herald-Times, and Gannett could be merging. I mean, what do you think the end game is here? Because, and I know we've talked about this before too, the Athletics, obviously a great thing in terms of getting all these journalists who are very talented positions, but we don't know what the long-term future holds there, and we don't know what the long-term future holds for newspapers either. So I'm just kind of curious your big picture thoughts on where this industry is headed.
It's sad to think about. I've been thinking about it a lot ever since that news of the potential Gatehouse-Gannett merger came out last week, because it's going to lead to more pain in newsrooms, more layoffs, more cuts to local news. It's just sad to think about, where everything stands. At the Herald-Times, it felt like for so long we were immune to some of the things that have affected this industry and really, pulled the rug out. We were family owned for generation, up until, February 1st. And with that family ownership, I think there was personal investments and personal pride in the product. I mean, they still, the Schurz family, they were not perfect, but I think they still believed in, creating a Bloomington Herald-Times or a South Bend Tribune that they could be proud of. They put money into it. They invested in the newsroom. They made sure we were staffed as well as we could reasonably be at this point in time, given the realities of the industry. it felt like a place where we were valued. It felt like a place where, they wanted us to do good work, whatever that meant. And then we were bought by Gatehouse, and that went into effect in early February. And you could just, our longtime editor, Bob Zaltzberg, retired. We now had a cold corporate ownership out of New York, an organization that has a poor reputation for handling newsrooms, for fostering an environment with compassion and care. And, morale took a huge hit at the Herald-Times, for a number of reasons. And it was really sad to see that go, because again, it felt like for a long time, being in a college town where you don't have that real direct competition, local news wise, maybe, outside the IU beat, of course, it felt like we were kind of safe. We were safe from some of the situations that have come up in some of the larger metropolitan newsrooms over the years. We hadn't seen layoffs until, Gatehouse bought us. And it just felt like for a long time. And to your point, for a long time, I thought, man, I might retire here. Like I could totally see myself just being here for a long, long time. Why would I leave? Bloomington is a wonderful town. It really suited my sensibilities, just from, a living, quality of life perspective. It was just a great place to live. And on top of that, I worked for a paper. I worked for an editor that really cared about me and wanted me to do good work and put me in a position to do those things. It was a great situation, but as time passed, I think that the realities of the business kind of caught up with us. We were sold and introduced to some of the cold, hard truths of the business and just the economics of things that for years under family ownership, I think we were kind of shielded from. And it's tough. This year I was asked to speak to some student journalists a couple times, and I felt really bad because usually I always jumped at those opportunities. That was one of my favorite things about Bloomington, was the opportunity to work with young student media members. I remember when I was in college, I just wanted to feel like I was doing, I didn't know if I was doing it correctly because I didn't have someone for a long time to, this is good. You could do this differently, until I went to the Baltimore Sun and met Chris Corman and met some of the other guys on staff there who really, showed me that I was on the right track. I was doing things right. And, that guidance stuck with me for a long time. I'll never forget it. And I'll never be able to repay them for what they did for me and help me in my career. So I always wanted to pay it forward for some of the kids at IU. And it was always a joy to speak to classes or get to know kids. And, a lot of times I would, they would send me stories and I would edit for them and just kind of point out some different things that they could do differently, things they were doing well. And I always enjoyed that part of it. But this year, being asked to speak to classes and being asked to motivate young journalists, I found it really difficult, because for the first time in my career, I was feeling beaten down by the industry, beaten down by the potential for the future, beaten down by, the ominous cloud that was hanging over our newsroom. It was really hard to tell kids, this is something you pursue. And realizing that internally for myself was difficult, just from the sense that this is all I've ever wanted to do. I feel like it's important, you can debate the importance of sports, overall, but writing for a newspaper, writing, just reporting, it's important. It's important stuff. And for the first time in my life, I was just like, man, I'm not sure I could really tell a kid to pursue this for a number of reasons, for job security, for, mental health reasons. There's just so many things that go into this business now that, I'm not sure they really prep kids for in journalism 101. And it just got to the point where, man, if I'm feeling like I can't tell kids anymore, I can't tell kids to really pursue this and follow what they want to do, follow what I thought was, a worthwhile and worthy endeavor. It was really kind of depressing to think that, this is where we are right now. And, so much is unknown about where things will go in the future, and, just locally, nationally. And, I don't know what the Herald-Times is going to look like, I think when I was talking to Chronic, I was like, I don't know what it's going to look like in 2 years. Right now, I don't know what it's going to look like in 6 months. It could look totally different, just given the potential for this merger. It's sad to think about. It's a real bummer. I always thought, I feel like this job will break your heart eventually in some sort of way. Sometimes it's the stories you write, that the people you encounter. And I think now, more often than not, it's the business itself, and coming to grips and coming to terms with just where we are and where we're headed. It's sad stuff. It's a tough industry to break into. It's a tough industry to stay inside of. And even when you're inside, it's a lot of difficult realities to confront with. So, Yeah, it's I came to IU, and the Herald-Times was a very stable place for 6.5 of the 7 years, and then you get bought or you get sold, and you have an influx of new ideas and new people coming into the newsroom, and it was a tough time, and morale absolutely took a hit. It was a place where I thought I would spend a long time, and then as soon as we were sold, I was thinking, man, I'm not sure I should really stick around here. It was a very tough decision to make. And obviously, like you said, we had some outside circumstances, but it was also a situation where had we not had those circumstances, I would have already been thinking, well, I need to have a plan B just in case. And that's a tough way to live.
For someone who hears that and is rightfully depressed, scared, shocked maybe, although probably shouldn't be shocked at this point given how kind of the trends, what advice would you give to someone to try and make a difference? Obviously, paying for subscriptions, supporting, your local news obviously is something that you can do. What else can people do to help reverse this trend? Because it's kind of a terrifying one when you start to, look down the line and see what the impacts are going to be of it.
Absolutely. Subscriptions help, support the businesses that advertise with the outlets, whether it's in print or online, click an ad from time and again. I don't know, because it's also difficult because just the business itself has done itself no favors. The financials, the organizations who own these media outlets, I don't think they've done themselves any favors either. You can buy all the subscriptions you want, but at some point they have to refigure the model and how news is sold and how it's marketed and all of that. It's just, there's so many things now that are catching up. We're paying for the sins of 20 years ago now. And it's tough because at some point you wonder, are subscriptions enough? Is clicking on ads enough? It's just, there's so many other things that go into this right now that make it so bleak and so depressing to think about from being on the inside as long as I was. It's hard to see really where it goes. It's just locally, nationally. It's unfortunate. It really is. And I hope that at some point, sooner rather than later, but I definitely at some point, in my lifetime, we figure it out because it's important. It is. You can say whatever you want about the political side of it, but it's important to have local news. It's important to have reporters. It's important to have healthy journalism operating as the checks and balances. There are a lot of good people in the business. There really are. There are also some knuckleheads, as there are in any other line of work. But it's an important institution to preserve, and we got to figure out a way to do it because it's hurting communities. I think it's hurting people, and it's hard to see exactly where it's going to go from here. It really is. So I'm not sure there's a one size fits all, especially for different markets. But certainly, like you said, subscriptions. Supporting the businesses that advertise within. But then again, at some point, these actual corporations are going to have to look themselves in the mirror and really figure out what's their mission here. Because I think some of the operation models really need to be reviewed, and someone much smarter than I needs to figure out another way to do this. Because right now, I'm not sure this is sustainable.
Mike, because we cannot let you go on a negative topic like this, and since even though he worked for me for 2 years and he never had me on his podcast, ball isn't life, and I still am upset about this, and I remind him of this anytime we interact on Twitter or any other way. I'm curious, you mentioned one of your favorite things in Bloomington was getting a chance to work with students and mentor and do things. Do you have a appropriate for podcast story that you can share with us about Josh Margolis, who will never, in my mind, he'll never be replaced on the Inside the Hall staff? Because for those who don't know Josh,
one of a kind.
I love the guy, but I also am still upset that he never had me on his podcast. So I feel it's only fair for Mike to roast him on our podcast.
Oh,
absolutely.
Where to begin with Josh? Josh, as you said, Josh is his own man. He is. I will never. Not only will there never be another Josh on the Inside the Hall staff, there will never be another Josh, I think, on this planet. Josh is, at times, I think, on his own planet. But I love that kid so much. He worked his tail off in his own way. So many stories. Gosh, we used to. I was having car troubles a couple years ago, and I used to pay Josh to take me to the airport for road games, and sure enough, Josh would show up. I'd pay him. And going to the airport with Josh was an experience unlike any other. I mean, the guy does not know what a speed limit is. He does not follow them. He creates his own lanes on the shoulders. I remember one time we were coming up to a semi, about to turn into the airport. We were about a mile away from the airport, about to turn, and Josh just veers around a semi truck and just creates his own lane off the shoulder. And this is like 5:30 in the morning. It's dark out. Bleary-eyed drivers abound, and it's just, Josh, what are you doing, man? He's like, it's fine. I mean, so many situations like that where his driving, I think, nearly cost me my life. I mean, I could go on for days. I mean, he used to record his podcast at the Monroe County Library in downtown Bloomington, and he was always late. And I mean, you step in the studio there, and it's just it is a travel to another dimension. It is one of my favorite people on the planet, and I think he's doing some really good stuff in Montana right now. And gosh, we really, really miss him. One of my favorite moments ever was this was right after the team got back from Hawaii in the 16-17 season, and I think there was, I guess, a couple nights before the game against Kansas, they had sort of like a dinner thing for both teams, and at one point they had a dance off, and I think it was OG versus Carlton Bragg maybe, and I think OG won the dance contest in Honolulu, and so obviously that was put on social media, and the team gets back, and Josh has his first opportunity to ask OG about it, and Josh is very loud, and I remember he takes the microphone and he's basically yelling into the microphone, OG, I saw you won the dance contest in Honolulu. Is that something you really like to do for fans, just having a lot of fun? Something along those lines. And perfect OG moment. OG looks at him, just leans in the microphone and goes, no. And Josh just like, what? He's totally taken aback. It was a fun mix of personalities. But Josh really brought so much to that. And I am forever indebted to you, Alex, for bringing him into our lives as you did and allowing him to do the things he did. And what a trip. Josh Margolis. Love that kid.
At times, like the real life personification of a Between Two Ferns skit.
Absolutely. He was very good at that. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Mike, for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for speaking to me, guys. It was great to reconnect, and it's going to be weird this season, not seeing familiar faces both in the press room, and I think I'll still be watching games and maybe even tune into Assembly Call at some point. So,
come hop on the show with us anytime. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah, it's getting. Me and Zach were talking about this the other day. It's so many faces have changed in the press room. Like are the guys that I've been covering games now, I think since 2010 or 11, and just obviously the unfortunate situation with Hutch. We miss him so much, but just in general, Corman, Dustin, you, all those guys moving on. There's a lot of great people that have come through, and I think next year it's going to be a different vibe without you there. So, Mike, we'll definitely miss you. I just want to say, I was, you're younger than me, but I always looked up to you on this beat because I thought, I said this on Twitter when you left, but I thought you did a really good job just as a storyteller, and you were always professional. You were always willing to help the younger guys, and I think they all appreciated that. I haven't met one student that ever said a bad thing about Mike, and they all appreciated the things that he did. So I just wanted to say that as we close here, and we'll look forward. I know you'll do great work again somewhere else. So hopefully we'll be watching for your next stop and following you along the way.
That means a lot. Thanks for saying that. That's absolutely one of the things I'll miss the most, is hanging out with you guys in the press room. That was just throughout all the craziness that swirls around IU athletics and certainly IU basketball, it was always kind of fun and calming, honestly, to have other people you could kind of commiserate with or just kind of shoot the breeze with. It was always a great time, and I'll miss you guys a ton.
What's the best way for people to stay in touch with you? You're on Twitter, Mike Miller HT. I don't know if your Twitter account will change at all, but what's the best way for people to connect?
I think that's probably it. And yeah, I'm taking submissions right now. If you have any ideas for how to change my handle, I haven't changed it yet because I have no idea what to change it to. For years, it's just Mike Miller and the outlet I worked for. So I don't work for an outlet right now, and I don't know how to change it. So yeah, Mike Miller HT. If you still want to connect on Twitter, I'm still there. I don't know what that Twitter account's going to become now that I'm not covering anything with it, but I'm still there, still reading, still favoriting things, and still around.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you for the time. Thanks for all the great content and stories over the years, and we wish you luck. And hey, hopefully we'll see you on an episode of the Assembly Call this year. That'd be awesome.
That'd be awesome. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, man. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.